It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. With us from Severodonetsk, Ukraine, Daily Beast Moscow correspondent Anna Nemtsova. Thanks for joining us from the front lines.
Thank you for having me.
From Abidjan, Ivory Coast, to Ziad Liman, publisher of Afrique Magazine. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, and hello from Abidjan.
Ana Navarro Pedro is Paris correspondent for Portuguese weekly Visão. How are things?
Yeah, very good.
Very good. Always very good. Are they always very good on the second floor where France24's.com's Lila Jacinto cracks the whip?
Busy, but in a good way.
Okay, busy in a good way. By the way, you can watch The World This Week, or you can listen. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine streaming services. If it's the West's attention he craves, then mission accomplished it is for Vladimir Putin. The attention this Friday turning to that phone call between the Russian president and his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, whose nation also holds the rotating presidency of the EU. The Kremlin, after putting a statement out that says Putin telling that those written responses Russia got earlier for its demands over Ukraine and Eastern Europe have basically been ignored by the West, but saying he'll carefully study what they wrote. In the meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry continues to feed a daily supply of images of military exercises near Ukraine's border. This Friday, it was near Rostov, across from Crimea. Anna Nemtsova, you're actually quite a bit a ways from there. You're more, should we say, the northwest of the front line?
Well, I'm very close to the so-called line or divide, traumatized and affected by the violence, Luhansk region, where people live without gas, without running water, in very poor villages, and they're often after 5 p.m. they have to go indoors because it begins and they can hear fire. But then during the last few days, they say it's been quiet. What you hear here all the time sounds actually very sad. People say we're used to the war. They've been dealing with violence for 8 years.
And I'm going to interrupt you because we're having trouble with the connection, and we're going to try to reconnect with you and cross right back because there's a lot of hissing on the line. We're going to try to get back to you immediately. People, of course, what Anna is saying, that people are living with the hardship of war. We're in the build-up to war, but of course, for where Anna is right now, Lila Jacinto, of course, the war is already going on. It's been going on for nearly 8 years now.
Yes, and increasingly we're getting reports from correspondents on the ground that even in the capital, Kiev, there seems to be a sort of a peculiar lack of panic. And you know, nobody quite can understand, you know, is this just the resilience of the Ukrainian people, or, you know, life goes on where they are. But, the Ukrainians, unlike in 2014 when Putin suddenly, made this incursion and caught them by surprise, this is not a surprise. They've had 8 years of preparation.
And what do you make of that both sides are doing everything so publicly? Again, those images we saw distributed by the Russian Defense Ministry on the one side, when the Russians did their pull out of some of their staff in Kiev, they did it very publicly. The British last weekend with public accusations of coup plots. Everybody's going public with all the information there.
Exactly. As you said, for Putin, if he wants to get attention, it's mission accomplished. But in Western capitals, London and Washington, D.C., they have obviously, they've made a decision to release intelligence in a bid to, stop this Russian propaganda and these sort of false moves that could happen. That comes with its own, it has its advantages and its disadvantages, because on the one hand, it's good to come out with this earlier rather than responding to Russia's moves. But on the other hand, intelligence is also, there are varying degrees of corroboration, and the U.S. has been bitten by its intelligence in the Iraq War. But obviously this is a real show of force. Yeah.
Let's see if we can cross back now to Anna Nemtsova. Anna, how's the connection there? Can you hear us okay?
The connection is great. I can hear you
much
really
better,
well.
much
Yes.
better on our end as well. Anna, it was interesting because you had this press conference earlier by the Ukrainian president. It was for the foreign media. And essentially he was saying, stop fear-mongering, stop trying to panic everyone. Is that the feeling where you are?
Exactly. Well, nobody thinks about the economic problems here, because here people don't have anything. People live on $100 a month, many households, and they're dealing with violence on a daily basis. Their houses get shelled, or they hear some machine guns. They cannot leave their homes after 5 p.m. Their children are deeply traumatized. Children don't see the moon in the evening. They don't play outside. Schools have no gas heating. They heat their schools with coal or with firewood. This is a very poor region where I am. It is very close to the positions, and people have been living in this terrible crisis for nearly 8 years. What President Zelensky was trying to say was that it costs Ukraine a lot of money right now. This panic about the war, wolves, it's about to start. Ukraine is losing billions of dollars. These billions of dollars could be spent on people living in these devastated regions in eastern Ukraine, where I am now.
All right, and at the same time, we have these tough statements. And by the way, Vladimir Putin's communique after the phone call with Emmanuel Macron, it was interesting, Ziad Liman, because you had a communique by the French presidential palace, which began with Ukraine and then talked about the broader issues regarding security in Eastern Europe. And the Kremlin's communique was basically in reverse. Ukraine came second. Ukraine, almost an afterthought in this whole troop buildup, is more about getting the West's attention about, well, in Moscow's eyes, bigger matters?
I don't know. I think there is a major issue for Putin is to reestablish the Russian area of geostrategical strength, and in that geostrategical approach, Ukraine and Belarus are key flashpoints, which they are ready to take a lot of risk to have them at least neutralized. I mean, this is I think it's the main point is how Russia influence won't be limited to this western flank, and how we can block definitely NATO coming to this area. So Europe is in some sort of an ambiguity here, because and it's perfectly reflected by Macron. What the European powers, and mainly France and Germany, what they want is some sort of a new order, a new deal with Russia, because Russia is their neighbors, and they cannot afford a prolonged crisis of that type, or even worse, a war. So what they're trying to do is try to be the middleman between America/NATO and Russia, which is a very difficult exercise, because the Russians try to overlap that and talk directly to Washington. But if you look at Europe's interest, it's crucial to have a structured deal with Russia for the years to come in terms of security, but also energy, borders, and all those issues are there. And that's why Macron is trying to open the channel. Will it work? Will the Russian listen to that channel? I'm not that sure, because for Russia, it's a critical issue. I mean, Putin has put a lot of credibility matter in that, and if he's felt as losing or retreating on his demands, it's basically his last element of power is this nationalism, is this willing to have this Russia geostrategic area. And if he loses that, he loses everything because the rest is not working well. The economy is bad. The ruble, has lost a lot of value. There's a lot of money trying to get out of Russia also because all those billionaires want their homes in Europe and they're trying to move money out. And so we see that it's also an internal discussion in Russia.
Also an internal discussion in Russia. You heard there Ziad Liman mention, Ana Navarro Pedro, the issue of interdependency between Europe and Russia, much more trade than there is with the United States. Your country, Portugal, next to Spain, you're one of those countries that doesn't import much gas from Russia.
No, we don't.
In fact, Spain imports none at all. I believe that's also the case.
Yeah, but Spain said it's. The Prime Minister said that they are ready to go.
The Portuguese, how far are they willing to go on this one? Is it far away?
We don't have a government right now, so we are having elections. So we are much more neutral right now than Switzerland will ever be. To tell you the truth, we cannot take a position in these conditions, not knowing which government is going to be on next week. But seen from Lisbon, it's quite a poker gamble going on in the border of Ukraine. And Putin hasn't gone all in yet in this gamble. But if his demands are not met somehow, some part of the way, he will lose face, and then that is the dangers for Europeans, for Western, for United States, is to stop every demand from Putin and make him lose everything in this gamble. And, that's when things can go south and across the border. So that is the big danger. He doesn't want definitely a war. That's why maybe Ukrainians are so confident or so, laid back right now. He doesn't want a war. Lavrov, his trumpet card, he's at a maneuver right now, and he's one of the best diplomats we've seen in the world so far. So he might, but he needs someone to, cross over, stretch a hand to them, and give them something for this situation to stop.
Ana Nemtsova, what would be enough for Vladimir Putin to save face with so many troops now at the border?
Well, in Moscow, colleagues and experts I speak with believe that Putin has pushed himself into the corner with this situation, and that something will happen. He will have to do something. And, I disagree that Ukrainians feel laid back. I've been traveling for a month almost around Ukraine. I went to the south, to Odessa first, then to Chernihiv, with Russia, and then to Kharkiv, which is just right on the Russian border, less than 40 miles away. And now I'm in eastern Ukraine. People feel very different about this pressure and about this panic, but believe me, after 8 years of crisis, it's really hard to live hearing that the war is about to start every day. It's just some people pack their suitcases and leave if they have money, but most people don't have money to run anywhere. They don't have a plan B. It's extremely difficult for Ukrainians right now.
And with the next Normandy format talks, those are the ones with German and French mediators scheduled in 2 weeks, that's given the Ukrainian foreign minister the opportunity to accentuate the positive. Let's listen.
Nothing has changed. This is the bad news. The good news is that advisors agreed to meet in Berlin in 2 weeks, which means that at least for the next 2 weeks, Russia is likely to remain on a diplomatic track.
And in Nemtsova, where you are, do people feel, well, at least we have an extra 2 weeks?
Well, here in eastern Ukraine, in the region of Luhansk, I asked an old woman who lives alone, very close to violence. She can hear machine guns and artillery, and filled up with tears. And she was begging for all politicians in the world to stop this war because we can't go on this way. And that was a heartbreaking message. And the worst part of this job is that you go away from this region, and people actually stay. And they say, this field our life is in the middle of this geopolitical crisis. Whatever you do, please stop it. We cannot continue living this way.
Jacinto.
I mean, the point here is we're all trying to figure out what is in Putin's head and what is he planning to do. One of the other things that we do not know is, would Putin want to keep this strategic brinksmanship going? So that is another possibility. How long can he maintain that? Which is very, very bad news for the people who Anna is speaking to on the front line. But how long is he willing to just keep brinksmanship going? That is another card that is being played in this.
And we're seeing as well, and I'll bring up this point because you heard Ziad Liman earlier talking about the French president's position on all of this. There are differences within the West, as you were pointing out, Ziad. Macron pointed the finger at Moscow. He was quite forceful in his remarks when he traveled to Berlin on Tuesday. The French president accusing Russia of hybrid actions, not just against Ukraine, but throughout Eastern Europe. Contrast that, if you will, with an Olaf Scholz, who 3 times during that press conference dodged reporters' questions about Germany's refusal to export arms to Ukraine. The next day, 5,000 helmets was trending on Twitter after the Germans pledged defensive headgear. A joke, retorted the mayor of Kiev, former world heavyweight boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko. Arguments over Berlin's wavering spilling over into the Bundestag, the parliament, on Thursday.
You do not lead, neither in Germany nor in Europe.
I mean, it was not the chairman of the FDP or the chairman of the Greens or the SPD who shouted first, no, but we'll take SWIFT off the table. That was you. You showed the Russian side that we are wobbling at this point.
So, what's your reaction to this infighting and this wavering in Germany that they're talking about?
Yeah, that's the thing, because United States, they have their position, but people tend to say that Europe and United States are on the same wavelength. No, because Europe does not have one single wavelength. Europe does not have a diplomacy, and France and Germany, the 2 main powers, are on different stances regarding Russia. And of course, you have to realize that Germany is very dependent on Russia's gas and energy, and that United States is merchandising, is negotiating with Qatar and other providers, mainly Qatar, to replace Russia as a provider to European countries. Where are we children for the United States to be negotiating on our behalf with Qatar to replace Russia as, so we don't...
Provider of liquefied natural gas.
That is absolutely amazing. We are a poodle in this. We are really a caniche in these negotiations. And of course, maybe one way out with Macron trying to have, very rightly so, maybe in his wrong personal way of doing it, but very rightly so, defending that Europe must have its own defense, and this will be a long process, but one we have to achieve. And Germans never, after Second World War, being on the same foot as France in this matter. Maybe if we could just, I don't know, start a new conference, international conference with all the players on strategic security in Europe with Russia. That's what they want somehow. And maybe this would be a way out of this crisis. And
Ziad Liman, do you agree? Would that be the way to do it? That is the big demand from Russia. Have a wholesale rethink of the architecture of security in Eastern Europe, which hasn't been reviewed since the end of the Cold War.
I don't think it's going to... I mean, we can try. I mean, first of all, everybody would have to be united on one line on the Western side, which is not easy, as all the person present here on the show have said. Europe is very much divided on those issues because each country has its own interest. But the second thing is, what the Russians are asking is very difficult. I mean, it's almost impossible to say yes. What does it mean, basically? It means that Ukraine will forever be a satellite state, and Belarus will be forever a satellite state, and maybe Kazakhstan will be forever a satellite state. How can we say, as Europeans and as Americans, as Western democracies, how can we say, yes, this is a good idea, let's have them frozen for centuries? It's not going to work. And the second thing is, in Ukraine, there was a revolution. There is ideas. I mean, if these people could vote, they would vote with their feet and move to Western Europe. They would enter the EU. I mean, this is so obvious that it's a huge challenge for the Russian power to deal with those reconstruction of the Soviet Empire with people who don't want to be in the Soviet Empire anymore.
Yeah, let me bring in Anna Nemtsova on this, because I know, Anna, you have to leave soon, and I just wanted to ask you, because back in 2014, when you had the Maidan Square protests, Ukraine was split between those who were pro-Western and those who were pro-Russian. You're in a Russian-speaking part of the country. What's it like nearly 8 years later?
It was very interesting to see Kharkiv, second city, with 2 million people where to speak Russian. This argument that Vladimir Putin used back in 2014 when he said that we have to defend the interests of Russian-speaking Ukrainians wouldn't work today in Kharkiv. People are very much united, and both Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers are patriotic, and they want to be in Europe. They want to be able to keep the international airport in Kharkiv, be able to fly to any big European city. The further you go away from big cities into villages, the closer you come to the actual, what they call here, peredok, which is a front line, the less people talk about geopolitics, the more they talk about just survival. And they don't know who will control their territory tomorrow. They just want to finally live in peace. But the majority of Ukrainian population, I can see this, and I've been a witness, united, you know, the united feel.
All right, so
very much together today.
Very much together today. Anna Nemtsova of the Daily Beast, many thanks for joining us in the World This Week from the front lines in eastern Ukraine. And by the way, after Bamako, we saw Russian flags Tuesday in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, after a coup that ousted yet another civilian government plagued by mismanagement, most notably the jihadist insurgency in the north. Burkina Faso's coup, weeks in the making. There was discontent brewing since November and the massacre of 53 gendarmes by jihadist insurgents in the north near the border with Mali. The rest of the region watching aghast. It's happening smack in the middle of a showdown between regional body Ecowas and Mali, and ahead of an emergency virtual summit that took place this Friday. The country's new strongman appealed for understanding.
Je sais comprendre les doutes légitimes suscités par cette rupture dans la marche normale de l'État. Lorsque les conditions seront réunies selon les échéances que notre peuple aura souverainement définies, je m'engage à un retour à une vie constitutionnelle normale.
So Ziad Liman, Burkina Faso suspended from ECOWAS. It doesn't yet mean, though, that they're under sanctions.
I don't know. We'll have to wait for a couple of days more to see the extent of sanctions, whether it be like Mali or not. The two countries are very. I mean, there's a different situation and a different approach. I mean, the militaries in Ouaga are really trying, I think, to send some sort of a positive message to the region and to the outside world, which is quite different from the Malian junta, which is more aggressive in its approach. So, you know, there's some differences, but basically we're dealing with the same structural decision. What we're having is a return to a military option which has proved in the past that it's not working anyway. So we will have transition, we will have this, we will have that, 1 year, 2 years, whatever, back to elections. And at the end, we will have to return to a civilian government, because only civilian government and institutions have the moral power to govern countries and to fight for their independence and to fight for the security. What happened in these countries from the hinterland is basically a security crisis of major magnitude, because they're not well equipped or too weak economically to finance properly an army or special regiments and everything. And you have also a structural economic crisis, which feeds the first one. And as long as you have so much poverty, as long as you have whole areas that are not covered by state work, with no schools, with no water wells, with no roads, with no electricity, this is basically feeding the security issue. And as long as we don't address that, there's no way you can address. It's not because you have militaries with nice speeches that it's going to change overnight. We're back to square one, basically. And I think the emergency, the urgency is to get back as soon as possible to civilian governments which have some sort of a broad consensus politically inside, which is not easy, but that's the only way. And there is the question of the French influence in the region.
Now, we'll talk about the French influence. We'll talk about the French influence in a moment, but
yes.
I want to address that first point you made, because at that Ecowas meeting, it was chaired by Ghana, and Ghana is one of a dwindling number of democracies these days in West Africa. Let's listen to its president, Nana Akufo-Addo.
I urge you to examine critically this rising phenomenon in our region so that we take the necessary decisions that meet the aspirations and expectations of our peoples. The rest of the world is looking up to us to be firm in this matter.
Viva Jacinto, your thoughts on that, and where it leaves a country like Burkina Faso?
Well, when he
which, by the way, staged a revolution to oust its strongman just a few short years ago.
Right, that revolution and that coup. Look, when the Ghanaian head of Ecowas talks about the aspirations of the people, what is striking is the way these coups are welcomed on the streets. Yeah. This is dismaying to see in 2022, and with this comes this very important thing that really must be addressed is the anti-French sentiment, which is also feeding, so it's all mixed up there. And this comes down to a central question.
Which is why we saw those Russian flags.
Exactly.
More to taunt the French.
Right. And now we have the third coup in Ecowas in the past 18 months. And we really should come down to the central question of what is France doing there? And why should France carry on doing this? Because at some point, you've got, people who are convinced that this is imperialism version 2.0. The entire mess in this region, let's not forget, started in 2012 in Mali when there was a coup against the then president ATT Amadou Toumani Touré. This happened a month before the election, and the man who overthrew him was hailed as the hero. So there's still this mentality on the street that the military can save us.
Well, you heard Ziad Liman say that it's kind of a sugar high, it's a quick fix, and then afterwards, a few years later, you need to go back to a civilian rule.
Yes, but Mali is kicking that can further down.
All right, let's talk about that, and then what you broach about the relations between Mali's junta right now and the international community. Wow, it's been quite a week. Bamako expelling Denmark from that European contingent, blasting the French defense minister, and it didn't stop there.
C'est la junte qui est illégitime. Il y a une véritable fuite en avant de la part de la junte qui n'est pas acceptable.
Les insultes ne sont pas une preuve de grandeur. Nous sommes disposés à discuter avec la France ou d'autres sur des questions de substance. Il ne s'agit pas de questions irresponsables. Ce que nous essayons de faire, c'est de défendre les intérêts de notre pays.
The junta is illegitimate, down with French insults, and this hint, which has been rolled back to a little bit of pulling out the EU contingent, which is there, let's not forget, not to recolonize Mali, but to fight jihadist insurgents.
Yeah, but they are not very popular neither with the local population, which is true. They don't, the security hasn't increased so much for populations on the ground, on territories that are not controlled by the state nor by European contingents. And that is one big part of this discontent of populations in those countries. And Corruption of civilian governments as well is another dagger in the legitimacy of those governments in the population's eyes. And this discontent with their governments in Africa right now, I mean, I would dare to make what seems to be a maybe very daring comparison, but in Europe, in Americas, they are also discontent with governments everywhere. It's not expressed in the same way. Of course, societies are different. Of course, they have different levels of organization, institutions, and so forth. But the discontent with governments is there everywhere in this 21st century. So, of course, the situation is much more acute in Africa because of all the things that we've said before: security, structures, infrastructures, and poverty, and corruption generalized. But we don't see any solution so far, as we don't see solutions neither in our countries, in Western societies.
Right, but the difference is, they are talking
huge.
About the...
But
right.
there is.
And very fundamental to what they're saying is the question of sovereignty, which, seems to be what they are all
just very briefly on this, Ziad Liman, you're in Abidjan, which is the powerhouse of French-speaking West Africa. What do people think there? Are they more on the street with the coup leaders that are thumbing their nose at Paris, or with those that are espousing rule of law?
No, I think there is preoccupation in Abidjan toward the situation in the region, which is normal. But we're talking about totally different set of situation. I mean, in Ivory Coast, you have growth, you have institutions, which they have held elections. It's absolutely different, and security-wise, it's better organized and better controlled, which makes a difference. And the second point,
well, you have a president who lifted term limits, and that's caused complaints.
Yeah, we have that discussion before. I mean, second term or third term. I mean, their approach is the third term was absolutely constitutional, and the election was held, and there was also legislative elections after. So there are canals of discussion. I remind you that there was also elections in Mali, and there were elections in Burkina. So I don't think the election issue is the point that matters. The point that matters is people are feeling safe. Do they have prospects? Do they have some sort of faith in their government and institution? And that's the major point. The second point concerning Ivory Coast is there are hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe people here, Malians, Guineans. We talk about workers, we talk about farmers, but we talk also about money, intellectuals. I mean, Malian fortunes are invested in Abidjan. Burkinabe capital is invested in Abidjan. And so Ivory Coast is the powerhouse, but it's also maybe the point where something can happen to restabilize the region. There's another country which is very important, is Senegal, but Senegal is a bit, is a bit off the radar screen, but still it's a democracy. It's been somewhat functioning for years, and they also have a lot of influence.
So perhaps the solution will be at some point. Will be at some point coming from there. I just want to move on because
always. No, I mean, in Africa, solutions are always regional.
Solutions are always regional. We'll leave it there for now. We're waiting, by the way, we've been waiting all week for the other shoe to drop across the channel. The week began with revelations of yet another Downing Street lockdown party. It was a birthday party. It was for the Prime Minister himself. Surely Boris Johnson was on the ropes. But then, in swooped Scotland Yard, the police opening their own investigation into Partygate. And that has delayed publication of an internal inquiry that's been billed as the starting gun for a leadership challenge within the Conservative Party. The Sue Gray Inquiry, it's called, named after the civil servant writing in. That's not Sue Gray, by the way. That's the head of the police department. She's now considering what to publish, what to redact. And is that giving the Prime Minister more time? In any case, the PM promising full transparency.
Are you delaying the Sue Gray report?
Absolutely not, but you'll just have to, I'm afraid, you've got to let the independent inquiries go on.
Will you publish it in full?
Of course.
So, Ana Navarro Pedro, we thought we'd have some clarity this week. Now it's going to be next week.
And Teflon, Mr. Teflon, Mr. Boris Johnson just keeps getting rid of all the scandals, all the criticisms that fall on him. It's quite amazing. But you see, he has been doing all his career on his likability. Being
so he's bought himself more time
being liked by the British people, and the people are really very divided from the Brexit times regarding his competence, efficiency, or his likability. The opposition has all the time attacked him, criticized him on his persona, on his own personality, not on his deeds, not on his political action, on his political choices. And on top of it, he has been very smart to choose, he's not the only leader to have done that, to have a cabinet where there isn't really a very light, very, very ingenious, very intelligent, very, very smart member of cabinet that can outshine him.
A clear single contender, though there's several names that have been floated.
So he seems to be like the only alternative to himself.
All right, Daily Telegraph cartoonist Matt this Friday drawing one cartoon. Adele, he says in it, Adele has posted a tearful message saying she is sick of waiting for the Sue Gray report. But don't worry, by the way, there's plenty of still to feed this scandal through the weekend. ITV's reporter, ITV, the news channel which broke the story, contradicting a Johnson-supporting Tory MP's claim that maybe there wasn't even a cake when Boris Johnson was, quote, ambushed at that birthday party in 2020. There was a cake, writes Paul Brandt. When we approached number 10 for an official response on Monday, they did not at any moment deny that there was a cake. Lila Jacinto, this story is going to run whether or not there was a cake, how many parties there were, who was there. But what is most important is there was this YouGov survey. It was done earlier this month, the polling agency asking British subjects if they had followed the rules during lockdown. And a vast majority of them said they did. And you got to wonder, Boris Johnson can hang on, but for how long?
Yes, but what is the alternative? And I agree with Anna on this. How much drama, how much circus, how much fantastic headlines and cartoons are we going to see on this? Well, until this report comes out, which is now kicked. The can is kicked down further, and it's just much more of a circus. So yes, of course, and the way this is playing to, it's very much an emotional issue. That they were partying in Downing Street while ordinary Britons were under a lockdown. But that seems to be the sum total of the discourse right now, that Boris was partying while others didn't. Nothing really substantive about what he's doing in terms of his policies, and I completely agree with you.
All right, before we go, it's a recurring theme that we've talked about a lot on this show. Big tech, groups like Facebook and YouTube, pushing outrageous content that keeps eyeballs in front of screens. Taking a stand this week was a rock icon, Neil Young, whose songs have protested the Vietnam War, the Ku Klux Klan, and the destruction of the planet, telling streaming platform Spotify to either pull the podcast of comedian and commentator Joe Rogan or remove his songs. And so they did, despite the hit to revenue for both the 76-year-old Canadian and his record label, Warner Brothers. And we had Neil Young, who was very adamant in his remarks, saying that, he didn't want to promote COVID misinformation. Let me ask you, Ziad Liman, when you look, because you yourself are a publisher, at this story of Neil Young and Spotify, the business model is changing, but because Spotify isn't just about music, but also podcasts, it doesn't. How do you get it to recognize that it too is a publisher just like you are?
I think we have to. The law has to get into this debate because platforms are basically saying they are not responsible on the content they carry, and it's freedom of speech and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But we know that they're able to also be like, Facebook at the time, they can also be disruptor of freedom of speech, or they can feed, they can, track their own clients. And I think it's highly time to regulate this business, to say that the platforms are publishers. They have a responsibility to monitor and moderate their content. It's not just a question of money. And on the issue of COVID-19, it's such a violent issue for many people. There have been so much suffering, so much casualties, so much people dying that, I would be the head of Spotify. I would really ponder the fact of giving such a platform, such an audience to this gentleman, Rogan, I don't remember his name.
Joe Rogan.
Who is basically a conspirationist and anti-vax. And I think we have to move, and it's not only, those platforms, it's Facebook, it's also Twitter. All those social networks are powerful force of expression, but they're also powerful force of disruption of expression. And I think at some point, states and law has to regulate all that stuff before it gets completely chaotic.
But then, again, the argument of how do you defend free speech, Lila Jacinto?
Well, this is the responsibility and free speech. We never had absolute liberty. There's always, free speech comes with responsibility. I'm going to spend the weekend listening to Neil Young because I salute what he did.
All right. We'll
keep on rocking on the free.
We'll keep on rocking in the free
Let me just be the devil's advocate here. The issue seems to be very straightforward and very with criteria, good and evil, but no. The issue behind there is censorship and there is freedom of speech and there are many issues behind all this publishing right to allow some type of speech and not another type of speech that should be
even when it's
seen.
A public health issue.
Well, but Neil Young has the right to take himself off.
But he has the right to take. But he made an ultimatum. And that's not very democratic.
All right. We'll leave it there. It's a conversation we can continue.
It's a very, very big thing.
Ana Navarro-Pedro, I want to thank you. I want to thank Lila Jacinto. I want to thank as well Ziad Liman for being with us from Abidjan. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.